You. So I got new specs. These are the silver reflective, or the grey reflective, instead of the blue. Let me know what you think. Give me a like if you like the specs. Okay, so this one, I watched Jonathan Pageau's video, and he's trying to explain why science is nested in religion, and he gives an explanation. He does a good job, but I think there's an easier way to explain this. An easier way to explain, instead of saying science is nested in religion, we can say that psychology is nested in mythology. I think that's more accurate. Psychology is nested in mythology. And then we have science is nested in psychology. And that's a bit tricky, because any scientific discovery is subject to the psychology of the scientist who's perceiving the data. Okay, so I'll go a bit into this. So I'm trying to use an analogy here. So your mythology is basically like your operating system. Now, so a lot of atheists or whatever will say, no, I don't have a mythology. Or scientific people say, I don't have a mythology. Wrong. You do have a mythology. You just have a very deprived mythology. You have a materialist mythology. So everyone has a mythology. You can't not have a mythology. You just have a material mythology. You have a mythology that the material world is all there is. And a religious person has their particular mythology. We have beneficial mythologies, and we have deprived mythologies. So just because someone has a mythology doesn't mean it's a good one. So I would say atheism is a deprived mythology, because it's incorrect. It's just based on the material world. I would say Islam is it's a mythology. But it's not. You can see it's not really advancing the civilization very well. We would say it's like a neutral mythology. I don't know. Who knows where to categorize it? And so far, the most successful mythology has been the Christian mythology. So it's a more successful mythology. Okay. So I'm going to try and explain how science is nested in mythology, because science is people say it's a scientific method, but the scientific method can only be applied by the scientists and the data coming through the scientists. So before you apply the scientific method, what you have is data going into a brain of a scientist. And that scientist has a mythology, whether he likes it or not. Okay? So before the scientific method is even applied, before the data is even registered, it's got to register in the psychology of the scientist. Okay? So a good example here, say the quantum experiment, the famous one, the double slit experiment. Now, say your mythology is the atheist mythology of the material world. So then you get data saying when the observer looks one way, it's going to have one result, and the observer looks another way, it's going to have another result. So the scientist gets this data, and he's got to process it within his operating system, within his mythology. So that data doesn't process in his mythology, in his psychology. His psychology is materialist, right? So that's his mythology, and the data, it's like an operating system on a computer. The data must fit the operating system. Yeah. So he gets the data and he says, oh, it can't be it. It must be the measuring system must be wrong, or the measuring system must be interfering with the data, or he tries to fit it to his mythology before the scientific method is even applied. Yeah. But say someone with the correct mythology, who understands the conscious reality, straight away the data fits. It's conscious reality. The observer gives the particle action, and it collapses the particle through the conscious observer. So you can see how one mythology, the data is processed straight away. The other mythology, the data is rearranged and to give a different result. So that's one small example of how mythology determines science, because mythology it determines how the data is perceived and how the data is processed. Okay. So another example would be the CERN particle colliders. So what's the science and the mythology got to do there? It's got a lot to do with it. Because what these atheists are doing, because their mythology is material, they're essentially trying to find their God in the material world. That's why they spend billions of dollars on these CERN particle colliders. What's the point? They're just smashing particles and finding smaller and smaller particles. But it's everything to do with their mythology, and they don't even realize they're doing it. So their mythology is the material world. So their God is the material world. So they're searching for their God by smashing particles. I'm not even joking. And that's what they're doing. They're doing it on a subconscious level. So you can say scientific method all you want, but your mythology determines your psychology, and your psychology determines how you read the data. Okay? So unless your mythology is correct, you're never going to read the data correct. You're never going to apply the scientific method correct. And we see that in nearly every science we see now. It's like they just read the data wrong. So it's so obvious that it's conscious reality from all the quantum experiments, but still they'll deny it. And all these dark matter theories, and they're all trying to fit their mythology into the data somehow by creating. They're always constantly creating more and more variables to fit the measurements in their mythology. So mythology determines psychology. Psychology determines how you read the data. So psychology determines science, and we go back, mythology will determine science. Pretty simple. Let me know what you think. Horum heb.